Some of you felt that I was being dismissive of Apple during our Apple Silicon reaction video, and I can understand why. My skepticism of Apple's vague and optimistic performance claims didn't exactly scream enthusiastic. But make no mistake, now that it's in my hands, I am super enthusiastic, and the Mac Mini represents not just the least expensive way to bring an Apple Silicon M1 SoC into your life, but also the most performant thanks to its form factor and its cooling.
The M1 Mac Mini is hands down the best value computer that you are going to find, period. And that hasn't changed with the latest offerings from Apple hitting the street either. And you know what? You should still buy one of these.
Just annoying. So would I buy the M1 Mac Mini again after 6 months? Yeah, I really would. I think the fact that I've lived with those two showstoppers for 6 months, and although they annoy me immensely, I think that speaks volumes about how good that M1 Mac Mini is. That Mac Mini outperforms pretty much every other device I have in the studio constantly. It never sweats, it slots easily onto that desk, it works relentlessly. If, like me, you can look past those showstoppers, they may not even affect you, but if you can look past them, it's such a good buy. So the answer is yes, I would 100% buy that again. I just hope.
And also arguably the most powerful computer that I've ever used. So after 9 months, does the Mac Mini need more power? So if you were to ask me, do I still like this computer? Do I still recommend this computer? Do I still think it's an awesome value? Should you get it if it seems like something you need? My answer is yes.
The M1 chip has made everything so much quicker, so much more optimized. The need for more RAM is not as important. Depends on, of course, it depends on your application now. Depends on the tools and what's important to you. Now, I do wish that I could do more expansion as far as my Mac Mini here, like you can do like on a desktop PC, but those are depending on the things that you value the most to you. Now, would I recommend buying this M1 Mac Mini now, a year later that it's been released? I would say it depends. Now, if you really need a computer and you're just kind of stuck, I wouldn't hesitate to buy it, but I wouldn't buy it at full price. There are definitely deals out there now, and even Apple's own site, the refurbished section of their store, I wouldn't hesitate to buy one of those machines as well.
And now if you combine the performance, the efficiency, and the reliability, you're truly getting a ton of value for the cash, especially compared to other desktop Windows PCs that you can get right now. And because of all of that, I've got to say that the M1 Mac Mini is by far the best computer to buy for someone looking for a budget PC right now. But with all of that said, there are actually still some people who should not buy an M1 Mac Mini. So let's...
Now I have over here sat under my monitor the cheapest M1 Mac Mini that you can buy. It is the cheapest computer that Apple makes. It is the 8GB RAM model with 256 gig of storage, the very baseline model. And I can say easily, and this kind of breaks my heart a little bit because it is so much cheaper than my 16-inch MacBook Pro was. The specs are less than the 16-inch MacBook Pro was, and still it outperforms the MacBook Pro 16-inch. I find that really difficult.
In my opinion, I believe that this particular M1 Mac Mini is the best value M1 Mac Mini you can buy right now if you don't need the ultra portability of a laptop. And even then, as I've shown in this video, a lot of people actually do use this as a portable device and use it very well. I think for the amount of performance and pure power this thing can deliver to you at such a bargain price of what is currently $649 or even less if you have a student or veterans discount, this thing trumps pretty much everything, and it has the performance, the stats, and also the reviews to back it up.
I personally have mine connected to the LG 5K ultrafine display, and it looks incredible. Really great for me when I'm both editing and watching videos. And this to me is a very pro feature, as these displays are meant for professionals. And with that, there's really no other way to say this. This computer is absolutely phenomenal. This is the fastest and most capable Mac I've ever used, and I can't believe I'm saying that about a Mac Mini. The M1 chip really is a game changer, and if Apple got the first generation this good, man, I'm dying to see what the next generation is going to look like, especially on their more pro devices. I could say confidently that this will be a great choice for you if you're coming from an older Mac, particularly one that's running on fumes like mine was. I mean, the value you're getting here with the price tag is truly unmatched.
But even with all the pros and cons, y'all, that I've shared in this video, do I think the M1 Mac Mini is worth the money at this time? Like, if you guys are looking to buy a computer, I would say 100% yes. Give the Mac Mini a huge, and I mean a huge consideration if you guys are wanting a desktop-like experience into the Apple operating system. And you don't want to really shell out a whole bunch of money, but you still want that same high-powered, fluent experience. Now, I have to admit, this machine here, y'all, is no doubt my absolute favorite computer I've ever owned.
But this much is true. The M1, it's not overrated. Now, it might not be the chip for you. It might not be the truck you need. But I'd argue that it's the chip for many, maybe even most, even for me. And it, along with its yet announced successors, will continue to demonstrate that the efficiency of building something in-house with the instruction mix, buses, cache locations and quantities, coprocessors, and additional additives allow for optimization and vertical integration that a one-size-all chip, it just can't accomplish.
This is clearly a retro throwback to those original colorful iMacs when they came out in the 90s.
But I'm not happy. As it turns out, Apple quietly crippled the performance of the entry-level tier without disclosing it on the product page. Not only does the base model have one fewer graphics core, as Apple advertises on the product page, it also has 50% as many fans, which means, at least in theory, it could be more prone to overheating and thermal throttling.
Okay, so it's a very thin device, 11.5 millimeters. It's
11.5 millimeters thin for the whole thing. It's thinner than a MacBook Pro. It's thinner than an Apple Watch. This entire computer is actually thinner than the depth of a headphone jack.
So you have the color matched Magic Keyboard, you have the color matched Lightning cable, and this has got a fabric weave around the cable. It looks really nice. You also have the color matched trackpad, color matched Magic Mouse, and the power supply also has a woven fabric cable that's colored.
As for the new peripherals, fundamentally, they're the same as they've always been, right down to the Lightning charging ports in sometimes interesting places. The new keyboard is the one thing that's been genuinely updated. It's slightly more rounded than the older designs, and it features a massive escape key, an emoji key that doubles as the function key, and a dedicated lock key that on the upper end models doubles as a Touch ID sensor.
But also, this new keyboard with the base model doesn't have Touch ID.
The power supply has a few interesting things going on. On the higher spec ones, it's got an Ethernet port right on the power supply itself.
But they really leaned into the external power brick situation with the iMac here. There's an external power brick here that's pretty beefy, but they've made the most of it. They've got color matching cables, and there's magnetic pins into the back. And they've also built in an Ethernet port into the brick in the higher end models. So first of all, the screen. The screen is bigger and it comes much closer to the edges than that old iMac design. So it's a 23.5 inch 4.5K display here, 500 nits, LCD, P3 color.
It's bright, cheerful, and fundamentally different from what you'd expect from a computer or even a computer monitor these days. The thickness, or rather the thinness, is awe-inspiring, and the all-glass front gives the machine an unusual flatness with no seams to disrupt the aesthetic.
The screen, 23.5 across, it's 4.5K, it's bright, it's color accurate, it's what you would expect from a iMac screen. These are always good and it does not disappoint.
You will not be making out the individual pixels.
I've noticed that when the iMac is booting up or when you have an entirely black screen, you can see some panel unevenness in the backlight.
Then there's the elephant in the room, the bezels. It seems these white bezels surrounding the display have divided both Apple fans and haters alike.
But the presence of these white bezels makes it easier to fit into home environments.
So our new take is that coupled with the very pastel color of the chin bar, the white bezel really does make the screen pop.
Now, it's got some pretty great speakers already.
The speakers sound awesome. There's 6 of them and they're just loud and clear. They're very iMac, they're very good. The mics are solid as well. There's 3 of them. There's 2 up front, 1 in the back, and they do a decent job at canceling out like ambient noise that's not supposed to be there.
These speakers provide clear, room-filling sound, and because they have Dolby Atmos support, it means you can listen to Apple Music spatial audio.
And they're really much louder than you'd expect from this small of a frame. It can crank loud enough to fill a room.
The speakers, meanwhile, are, well, what can I say? They are fantastic.
The webcam is decent, but it does not do the facial tracking thing that the new iPads can do.
And of course, we can't forget about the new 1080p webcam. Jonathan, over at our Mac Address channel, go subscribe if you haven't already by the way, did a test for his review, and as you can see in both his and ours, the signal processing that Apple is doing with their M1 SoC does an excellent job with this many pixels, and that's particularly true compared to the old 720p webcams that Apple used for so freaking long.
And they're pretty good, actually better than I was expecting. It is 1080p finally, which is awesome. But more than that, the colors and the contrast are way better, actually better than I feel like they were in the M1 laptops. And the studio quality microphones, as you can hear, best mics ever in a Mac, are pretty good.
You know, the 8GB model, I get it, it's an attractive value. I would probably recommend 16 gigabytes.
The fans are audible on both machines. There's a whirring and whooshing kind of quality to the sound if you get your ear up close, but it's difficult to detect from a sitting distance.
In terms of ports, you have your headphone jack on the left and you have 4 USB-Cs on the back, at least on the premium model, and 2 of those are Thunderbolt 4. If you get the kind of base model, you only get 2 USB-C on the back, and those are both Thunderbolt 4.
Most people would probably benefit from a Thunderbolt dock though, and even on the entry-level model, that one only has 2 Thunderbolt USB-C ports, and a computer that is this big in this form factor, just having 4 data connections.
Really, the only thing that got worse is the port situation.
It is a regression from the previous 21-inch iMac, which just had more connections.
The port selection is decent. I guess on an iMac like this that's super thin and focused on aesthetics, it's to be expected, but a couple more would have been nice.
But if you upgrade to the higher spec models that start at $14.99, then you have 2 more USB-C ports for a total of 4.
The M1 is just downright snappy when doing basic tasks. But I also want to say it does have a limit, and if you think this is a pro-level iMac, well, don't be fooled. This is still very much intended to be a consumer-level product.
I think for the average person, you'll be plenty pleased with this. It's good, right? It's really good, but it's not that extra step that we've seen in iMacs of the past. I was hoping for there to be more, but there isn't. This is the exact same kind of performance as you would get from like a M1 MacBook Pro or the M1 Mac Mini. So
the 24-inch iMac, as it is right now, is identical to the MacBook Pros and Mac Mini in all but form factor.
I mean, this new iMac is clearly a far better computer than the baseline 21.5-inch iMac it replaces. Like that.
Don't buy this. Get the Mac Mini. It has USB Type-A. You can even get it with 10 gig networking.
Even though I am someone who's obviously not in the target demographic of this baseline iMac, I actually think it's a great computer.
So what do I think about the M1 iMacs? Well, it's clear they're not for everybody.
And this iMac is still going to represent the best value workstation machine that combines so many great features with good performance. And again, I still have no issue recommending it to people as long as you're aware of its limits. And again, for most people, you're not even going to hit those limits.
I have a lot of computers, probably too many for one person. But when it comes to productivity, there's still only one that I reach for from this pile. Starting my day, I sit down, open my MacBook Air, and
we had no idea how much it would impact the laptop space. With the impressive combination of build quality, performance, battery life, reliability, and of course value, this MacBook has single-handedly flipped the script in terms of the general perception of Apple MacBooks compared to Windows laptops, with the MacBook Air now being a better value than many other Windows machines.
Where I was just expecting to be underwhelmed by this MacBook, but in reality it's got a super powerful and efficient M1 chip, a light and portable form factor, a great keyboard and trackpad, a nice display, and excellent battery life. So for how I use this laptop, it should easily last me for the next 5 years, maybe more.
It's just down there. Hands up, I am really boring about the M1 MacBook Air. But I don't care. It is without doubt the most impressive laptop I have ever owned. And this is coming from a guy who has a spec'd up M1 Max 16-inch MacBook Pro sitting right in front of him. And this is a incredible laptop. Full review of this coming soon. Subscribe, hit the bell if you don't want to miss that. But it is not as exciting or enjoyable to own, I don't think, as the M1 MacBook Air.
And this base model, MacBook Air M1, has totally changed how I work on a daily basis. Let me explain. In short, this is the best computer I've ever owned. Shocking news, I know, considering how many notebooks have gone through my hands, how many PCs I've built myself, but welcome to my long-term review of the MacBook Air M1 base model and why I think you should get one. So what can I say? After 6 months of using this device, it's the best computer for $1,000 you can buy in terms of like a really complete portable package without any major compromises.
It's been over a year since the M1 MacBook Airs were released, and it's safe to say it is a great machine. You can do coding, 4K video editing, insane multitasking, and pretty much anything else.
Could have been 10s, Dieter.
Yeah, they could have been 10s.
Seriously, the only real knock on these machines is that Apple insists on using horrible webcams in its laptops. Apart from that, you're looking at a huge jump in performance and significantly improved battery life for the same price as the last models, and seamless compatibility with the entire ecosystem of existing Mac apps.
There were 1,000 things that could have gone wrong with this transition. The iOS apps were a whiff, but everything else didn't just go right. Apple exceeded our expectations.
So that's the M1 MacBook Air experience for me, and it's been great for the past 12 months. The battery life is amazing. It's easily a 2-day laptop off of a single charge, and the fact that there is no built-in fan in this computer while we do all the kind of work we want to do is just simply fantastic.
Let me just say right off the bat, this is probably the perfect laptop for a student, entrepreneur, freelance worker, and essentially everyone. The MacBook Air after a year is still able to encompass reliability, usability, and speed. For example, that M1 chip in the MacBook is able to power through so many tasks with no sweat. The overall build quality of the MacBook Air is clean and light.
With all the talk of the brand new M1 Pro MacBooks, I want to make one thing clear. If you are looking for the lightest, best value, most powerful Ultrabook that you can get for the money, you should still buy the M1 MacBook Air, even over those bigger, more expensive MacBooks. But at the end of the day, so what, right? Obviously, this is the third time I've recommended you buy the MacBook Air. I've never, ever done that with a computer or anything else before, and I'm not sure that I'll ever do it again. This computer is lightning in a bottle, and
The new M1 MacBook Pro and MacBook Air are outstanding. Their performance almost lives up to Apple's extraordinary claims. Their look and feel is reassuringly Apple grade. Their battery life is, simply put, exemplary. And the transition from x86 to ARM, so far at least, has gone shockingly smoothly. Linus, you might say. Those don't really sound like problems. And they're not. For you. You gotta pay attention. I said Apple has a problem, because it's gonna be really hard to one-up what they've done here.
We were wrong about the M1 MacBook Air, but I am so glad that we, along with many others, were wrong, and I'll explain why in just a bit. Hey guys, it's Max, and welcome to my long-term review of the 2020 M1 MacBook Air. It's incredible. There are zero issues with it. Yes, you should buy it. 8 gigs of RAM is fine, and 7-core graphics don't matter.
But I can say that if you're looking for a great computer that is able to work very well from a productivity standpoint, and you don't really need pro-level performance, the Air is going to be a computer that is going to be very trusty for many years to come, and I feel like it is a good time to pick one up right now. And
So if I were looking for a laptop within this roughly $1,000 price range, I think the first laptop I would recommend to someone looking for a thin and light laptop would be the M1 MacBook Air, unless they don't like macOS.
And the MacBook Air was, MacBook Air was awful when it was first released. You had a few tabs or windows open, that's it, the thing would just heat up. It's come a long way. And honestly, the M1 MacBook Air is, in my opinion, much better value. And it gives you good performance as well.
I have switched my entire life over to the base model $999 MacBook Air featuring the brand new Apple M1 chip. I'll spoil the entire video right now for you. This is the new default recommendation for a laptop for me.
The future for Apple Silicon is glowing very, very brightly. And I think for a company that's relatively new to this, at least in the desktop space, it's awesome, it's amazing, it's going to drive the whole industry going forward. So if you're looking to get a new computer right now and you're doing sort of things that I talked about, the MacBook Air is perfect. If you're a student, get a MacBook Air right now. I wouldn't even worry about M2, what's coming next. I wouldn't even upgrade to the 8 cores, 7 core will be fine. You're going to be great for probably many, many years.
If you are able to pick up an M1 MacBook Air for $900 right now, it is just a steal and is basically the best value laptop if you aren't into gaming. So is it worth buying the M1 MacBook Air right now with the M2 MacBook Air potentially coming around the corner? I would say yes, definitely.
MacBook Pro 13 was released as the first wave of Apple's transition over to its own M1 processors. Small, portable, fairly powerful, and unlike the MacBook Air, it does have an active cooling system inside of it. However, I think it's pretty easy to say that after this first year, this might be the most disappointing of all of the first generation M1 Macs. It's not bad, it's just not as good, or it's not as actually great as the others it's standing next to. And because the MacBook Air, the MacBook Pro 14, and the M1 Mac Mini exist, I don't really have a use case in which I can wholeheartedly say, hey, go get the MacBook Pro 13.
The new M1 MacBook Pro and MacBook Air are outstanding. Their performance almost lives up to Apple's extraordinary claims. Their look and feel is reassuringly Apple grade. Their battery life is, simply put, exemplary. And the transition from x86 to ARM, so far at least, has gone shockingly smoothly. Linus, you might say. Those don't really sound like problems. And they're not. For you. You gotta pay attention. I said Apple has a problem, because it's gonna be really hard to one-up what they've done here. Even if you were to go out of your way to point out the flaws, it's hard not to recommend either of the M1 MacBooks. They really are just that good.
At the base model, like the entry-level stuff, we have the regular M1 products. So the 13-inch MacBook Air and the 13-inch MacBook Pro, and these are very energy efficient and quite capable. But for the vast majority of people out there, that 8-core M1, like the entry-level product from Apple, can do so much stuff.
So, would I recommend this laptop? Big reveal coming? No. I would never, of course I would recommend this laptop. Of course I would recommend it, 1000% I would recommend this laptop. I would recommend you to get any Apple M1 laptop that you can find actually, whether it's the MacBook Air or the MacBook Pro. Really, I just think that it seems like it's the best choice of laptop that you can get right now.
The M1 MacBook Pro is a good laptop, but I just can't recommend it anymore. So here's how I look at this decision. For the majority of buyers, the MacBook Air is a perfect laptop. It's plenty powerful, it's super efficient, it's light, it's portable, and you can get it for under $1,000. If you need more, then the choice comes down to $1,699 for the 13-inch MacBook Pro with 16 gigs of unified memory and 512 gigs of internal storage, or $1,999 for the 14-inch MacBook Pro with the M1 Pro chip and the same amount of memory and internal storage. So personally, I think that you're getting a lot more for this extra $300, and I would go with either the MacBook Air or the 14-inch MacBook Pro.
Could have been 10s, Dieter.
Yeah, they could have been 10s.
Seriously, the only real knock on these machines is that Apple insists on using horrible webcams in its laptops. Apart from that, you're looking at a huge jump in performance and significantly improved battery life for the same price as the last models, and seamless compatibility with the entire ecosystem of existing Mac apps.
There were 1,000 things that could have gone wrong with this transition. The iOS apps were a whiff, but everything else didn't just go right. Apple exceeded our expectations.
But right now, this is, in my opinion,
a portable Mac Pro. So this does all the tasks I need of the Mac Pro. It's quiet. It's only ever spun up the fans twice, once playing that game, once exporting video, and only when it's connected to that external display does it spin up the fan. Otherwise, it doesn't when you're exporting video. So it's incredibly quiet. It works great. It has amazing battery life, and I highly recommend it.
So what should the takeaway be from all of this information? So if what you're going to do with a laptop is going to be a lot of browsing, photo editing, graphics design, some video editing on Final Cut Pro, I'd say the MacBook Air actually perfectly fits what you need from a computer. But if you need something with a bit beefier specifications, then I do think the new 14 and 16-inch MacBook Pros are the way to go. Before these were released, you'd likely buy a 13-inch MacBook Pro and increase the specifications. However, now the new 14-inch MacBook Pro costs the same as a 13-inch one with those increased specs. So to me, it is a bit of a no-brainer.
So here's the bottom line. I'm blown away. Like, this is a huge step forward for Apple. And this is what they've been waiting for years, to finally create a MacBook that's silent, that has amazing battery life, and has performance like nothing else out there. I usually don't recommend first generation products, but I'm gonna recommend this one.
The fact of the matter is the MacBook Pro M1 is a perfectly fine creative laptop, especially thanks to the fantastic battery life on this thing. Definitely really handy if you want to be editing on the go at some point in 2021 when we can actually leave our houses again. And the performance is good, as I stated before, if you actually stick to Apple's own rulebook. But if you want to be using third-party software and the like, you're not going to get any benefits from the M1 that you wouldn't get from much cheaper Windows devices.
So let's talk about my recommended configurations. If you're a content creator, whether it's for photos, videos, or music, I would go with 16 gigabytes of RAM. If you're only editing photos and it's more of a hobby than, say, a job, 8 gigabytes of RAM will most likely be okay. If you mostly use your Mac for web browsing, emails, doc work, etc., then you might want to take a look at the MacBook Air. For storage,